A PhD from the University of Illinois, the erudite Professor Makarand Paranjape is the author of many books and academic papers. Dr. Paranjape is here to tell us an Indian story, Padmavati. Dr. Paranjape.
Thank you very much, Dimpleji. If I were to think of a subtitle or an alternate title, then I would say that as far as Sanatan Dharma is concerned, failure is not an option. I don't know if Kiranji is around, but I think he will quickly connect with the connotation of that subtitle. Anyhow, the Queen of Chittor, history's heroine, and the protagonist of Sanjay Leela Bhansali's film, has been the subject of much debate and controversy, not to mention threats of dire consequences or even death to those responsible for it. That is why I thought that I would speak on this topic today. But let me clarify at the outset that this is not just a retelling. In fact, it is not even a mere exercise in interpretation. I would like to think that what I have to offer this morning is also an example of hermeneutics or meta-interpretation. We've had one example of that with Vishwaji's fantastic interpretation. Thank you for that. Or how to make sense of Indian stories. For those who are academically inclined, we might call these stories allegories, national or even civilizational allegories. So if I were to summarize my main point, I would say that not only is Padmavati an Indian story, after all, that would be rather obvious, for there are countless such Indian stories. India is the original home of stories, the Katha Sarit Sagara. But I would argue that Padmavati is not an ordinary but a quintessential Indian story. In fact, the story of India itself. It is this that I shall try to demonstrate over the next, I thought 18, but now 13 minutes. What then is the Padmavati dispute really about? Let us find out. Was Padmavati a historical figure? We heard this morning that we want salvation from history, not salvation through history. And I might add that whatever Padmavati was historically, she quickly escaped into legend, which is where she became immortal. But we don't know for sure. But what is pretty obvious and uncontested is that Alauddin Khilji did lay siege to Chittorgarh and captured it in 1303 after 8 months of stubborn resistance by the Guhila Rajput ruler Ratan Singh. The earliest account of this military feat is Amir Khusro's Khazan-ul-Futuh. Khusro, one of the founders of Hindavi literature, better known today for his Sufi songs dedicated to Nizamuddin Aulia, was Khilji's courtier. What is more, he actually accompanied the Sultan on this campaign. In Khusro's account, there is no mention of Padmavati, nor of the terrible Johar, the mass immolation committed by her and the ladies of the fort before it fell into Khilji's hands. What Khusro does state is that 30,000 Hindus were, and I quote him, cut down like dry grass, unquote, on Khilji's order. Would Khusro not have written about Padmini or the Johar led by her? That seems unlikely because he does mention that during Khilji's earlier conquest of Ranthambore, the ladies of that fort committed mass immolation rather than fall sexual prey to Khilji's marauding hordes. Whence springs the legend of Padmini then? The answer is from Malik Muhammad Jaisi's Padmavat, an Awadhi epic written in the bardic style. The poem was composed in 1540, about 250 years after the siege of Chittor. Jaisi, moreover, lived in what is today's Uttar Pradesh, not in Rajasthan. So, how could he tell the story? Again, the likely answer is that he combined the legend of Padmini, which was already prevalent and popular, with known literary antecedents and added his own imagination to make the story rich and powerful. Jaisi's Padmavati does commit Jauhar to repel Khilji. But the whole story, like the Iliad and the Ramayana, is really a story of conquest and woman linked to territory. Padmini, like the Helen of Troy and the abducted Sita of Ayodhya, is the trigger of Khilji's imperial lust, not just his attraction for an individual woman. It would seem that Bhansali's Padmavati, which most of its supporters or detractors have not yet seen, is based on Jayasi's fictional rendering. Why then should it bother us so much, threatening to tear apart our social fabric? The reason is that Padmavati is not about history or about Rajput pride or Hindu anxiety or glorification of sati. It is really about the splendid, if not solitary, exemplars of resistance. The Muslim conquest of India was as brutal as it was bloody. It also involved temple breaking, large-scale loot, vandalism, decimation, enslavement of subdued populations, and, yes, predatory sexual violence and captivity. No attempt to whitewash this history or mitigate its trauma will succeed. I say this not to ask for retributive corrections or revenge histories. History, the wrongs of history, cannot be righted by political correctness or initiatives today, let alone by violence. History instead calls for deep contextual understanding combined with corrective self-reflection so that the errors of the past are not perpetuated into an uncertain future. When it comes to Padmavati, the legend is more important than history. Padmini, like Rana Pratap, both associated with Chittor, symbolize resistance to the Muslim conquest of India. Why are such stories important, even to this date? Because they show us that one part of the Hindu psyche remained undefeated, unvanquished. Indeed, throughout the 800 years or so of Muslim rule, there were always pockets of resistance, some like Chittor, Vijayanagar, the Maratha and Sikh empires, quite glorious and successful. What obtained in India is thus quite different from the other countries of Islamic conquest, whether Arabia, Iran, Africa, Central or Southeast Asia. In all these places, there are hardly any such accounts of resistance, let alone of Jauhar and the Saka. Padmini is worshipped to this day because she symbolizes that die-hard refusal to submit to the evils of greater power. So, we must understand the difference between Padmini and Padmavati, the historical figure and the character in the epic. Though both are related, with the latter based on the former, they are not identical. As to the historical Padmini, as I said, we know very little. She was apotheosized into legend soon after her purported Jauhar, her martyrdom. Indeed, it's these stories of Padmini's great sacrifice, sung by bards, that probably inspired Jayasi. But still, that does not explain why this Muslim Sufi poet, who lived 200 years after the tragic siege of Chittor, chose to write about it. Why did he make it his main theme? I believe he did so because he too thought that he was telling the story of India, the India he knew and loved. Padmavat, we must realize, is an epic of Hindu-Muslim synthesis and commingling. If anything, it is more Hindu than Muslim because it is not merely a tale of Islamist domination and conquest, which was a well-established genre by the time of Jayasi. Nor is it written in Persian, the court language of the Muslim rulers, but in Awadhi, the people's language. In fact, Padmavat, written about 80 years before what is arguably the most important medieval North Indian text, the Tulasi Ramayana, becomes its precursor, readying the vernacular for the weight of epic exertions. Jayasri follows Hindu invocatory and narrative traditions. His epic is steeped in Hindu mythology and metaphor, beginning in fact in Kailash with a supplication to Shiva. Moreover, he follows Hindu aesthetic and spiritual traditions, chiefly the Kama Shastra and the Nath Yoga Parampara. Dr. Anand Kumar, who is doing a new translation of Jayasri, believes that he was an initiated Nath yogi as well as a Chishti Sufi. In that sense, we must note that he, in some way or the other, is one of the spiritual ancestors of the current Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath. The Nath yogis, like the Tantrics, the Siddhas, the alchemists, the Taoists, and the Kabbalists before them, sought physical immortality, a quest that has been revived in recent times by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, though it is not fashionable to talk about it, or at least to take it literally. Padmavat is thus also an esoteric yoga manual, explaining the mysteries of the horizontal and vertical axes of transformation, contained in the ancient symbols of both the cross and the swastika, with the Coptic cross somewhere in between. Ida, standing for the left and the feminine, or Soma, and Pingala, right, masculine, Agni, represent the two hemispheres of the brain. Ramaji mapped them yesterday, of reason and passion respectively. Between these two poles or dualities and balancing them is the Shushumna, the central subtle nadi, the channel of ascension of the coiled Kundalini, Shakti, from the Mooladhara to the Sahasrara. This is the riddle that Sigmund Freud rediscovered and solved in his own psychoanalysis, id and superego, with the ego playing the balancing role. In Tantra Yoga, the Kundalini, when it reaches Sahasrara, the practitioner attains immortality. But really, the underlying structure of synthesis involves the abolishing of duality. Duality is death. Non-duality, Advaita, is immortality. Since time is short, 2 minutes 48 seconds, it will be impossible to explain this symbolism in Padmavat fully. But the whole story is set in motion by the search for Padmini, the perfect or the superior type of woman, who is described in the Kama Shastra text, the Anangaranga thus, and I quote, "She in whom the following signs and symptoms appear is called Padmini, or the lotus woman. Her face is pleasing as the full moon, her body well clothed with flesh is as soft as shiras or the mustard flower. Her skin is fine, tender and fair as the yellow lotus, never dark colored, though resembling in its effervescence and purple light of youth the cloud about to burst. Her eyes are bright and beautiful as the orbs of the fawn, well cut with reddish corners. Her bosom is hard, full and high. Her neck is goodly shaped as the conch shell, so delicate that the saliva can be seen through it. Her nose is straight and lovely, and 3 folds of wrinkles cross her middle about the umbilical region. Her yoni resembles the open lotus bud, and her love seed, Kama Salila, the water of life, is perfumed like the lily which has newly burst. She walks with swan-like gait, and her voice is low and musical as the note of the kokila bird. She delights in white raiment and fine jewels and rich dresses. She eats little, sleeps lightly, and being as respectable and religious as she's clever and courteous, she's ever anxious to worship the gods and enjoy the conversations of the learned, the Vipra. Such then is the Padmini or lotus woman. This is the description from the Anangaranga. Interestingly, Kalyana Malla, the author, had a Muslim, Lodi patron, and that Padmini corresponds to Sayujya Mukti in his scheme, merging with the essence of the Lord or ultimate reality. In fact, in his text, all women represent various types of mukti. Where are you going to find a more woman-positive or life-positive text? Padmini, Hastini, Shankhini, Chitrini, they are all symbols of moksha in this text. In other words, Padmini refers not only to a specific historic queen, the queen of Chittor, but the ideal type of woman. She also refers to physical perfection. Whoever unites with her will attain immortality. Time's up. But I'm going to wind up, with your permission, Dimpleji. Ring the bell, please. In other words, there is a political angle to Jaycee's story, which also attains prominence at this point. The Rajputs are disunited. They fight each other. An abused and disgraced Brahmin minister in Ratan Singh's court takes his revenge by defecting to Alauddin Khilji. It is he who, having overheard from the parrot Hiraman of the fabulous and unearthly beauty of Padmini, plants the idea of ravishing her in the Sultan's head. In the end, the two Rajput brothers in arms fight over Padmini, both dying in the process. The great fort of Chittor is about to fall to Khilji. The queen, along with her ladies in waiting, court mass immolation, killing themselves in the terrifying fire and the act of Johar. An empty, charred fort, smelling of burned human flesh, falls into Khilji's hands. Jaycee mocks him. He says, the Sultan only had stones and bricks of the ruined citadel to convert to Islam. No one gets Padmini in the end. So, here's the moral of the story. No one gets India. Gets meaning both enjoys or understands. Neither her legitimate spouse, legitimate, but in this case incompetent, who cannot defend her, let alone understand her true value, nor the pillaging, plundering hordes who wish to conquer her. The fort, itself a symbol of Padmini's virtue and maidenhead, falls, but the queen does not surrender. She prefers death over dishonor. She, in other words, is the medieval version of Sati, the ancient spouse of Shiva, who jumped into her father's yajna rather than submit to him. Daksha has often been portrayed as a figure of lust with a ram's head. Who knows what he wanted of his daughter? At any rate, it must have been so intolerable that she preferred death. The other, as the phrase Sati Savitri suggests, is the savior, is the one who saves, the symbol of light, of higher consciousness, Tat Savitur Varenyam. Hence the pair, Sati Savitri, which we trivialize and mock these days, actually represent the dyad of Bharat Shakti as sacrifice and savior. Between both of them are all the happy spouses, equal partners, as Dushyanji told us, with the beautiful eyes of Mata Sita making her superior to Rama. Equal partners both in Kama and Artha on the one hand and Dharma and Moksha on the other. And of these, Radharani is the supreme as the paramour of God. I would suggest that all these Devis and heroines are archetypes of Mother India herself. Bharat Mata, whom Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in recent years taught us to worship in Anandamath by giving us the new mantra, Vande Mataram. And it was Sri Aurobindo who took it to a step forward, a step farther in Bhavani Mandir by speaking of Bhavani Bharati and Bharat Shakti. So, let me tie up all the loose ends. Why are we so upset or even agitated over an imagined slight to Padmini? That is because we cannot tolerate the rape of Mother India by any foreign conqueror or sexual predator, even if such a narrative is justified by an alien theology of conquest or substantiated by our own unfortunate history. Just as in real life, many a Draupadi may have been disrobed or worse, as the atrocity to Nirbhaya shows, in our own epic, Bhagwan Vyasa did not permit such a disruption of the moral order. He literally introduced do ex machina, the unending sadi of our heroine by the grace of Sri Krishna himself. Likewise in Jaycee's epic, as in the traditions of bardolatry which he drew on, such an insult to Padmini was never depicted. nor can it be tolerated today, even in the name of freedom of expression. Bharat Shakti, Bharat Mata, Mother India, in her ideal type, will always prefer death to dishonor. Indeed, that is why, despite centuries of Islamic onslaught and relentless oppression, Hindu India was never completely subdued. There were 1 million Padminis who preferred death over rape and dishonor. There were 1 million Rana Prataps who ate grass and slept on rocks than accept the vassalage of a foreign power. Both Padmini and Rana Pratap are Swaraj warriors of India. We have seen the same saga of courage and sacrifice played out over and over again, right up to our times. India was not, is not, and will not be conquered. She is immortal because she will always prefer death to dishonor. Last sentence. That is why I would argue that the agitation over Padmavati is only partly about history, but mainly about honor. Dishonor is not an option, but death is. Thank you.